our second guest here is Alex Krainer has just arrived in the studio. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. We are under a little bit of a heat wave
Okay.
in Croatia, but apart from that, everything well. Oh
Hi,
yeah, and I
Alex.
also have a.
Whoa!
I also had a little accident, so I have a broken hand.
I've never
But
broken a bone in my body. I'm actually ashamed to say I feel like it builds experience, but I heard from friends who did that being in a heat wave with a cast sucks more than most experiences. Is that true, or does it feel okay?
I haven't had most experiences, but this definitely sucks. And and this is my first time I'm in a cast. First time in my 56 years. So,
well, congratulations. All right, got that on the bucket list.
Wow. I have had one broken bone. I slipped while I was moving some furniture in an office and ended up doing a roundhouse kick into a solid oak door. And that's what it looked like, I think, in my head. Broke my first metatarsal and also broke out the entire door as well. The door was fine, but the door jamb broke out, and I was in a pretty severe cast for a while. So wow. Well, nice to meet you, Alex.
Nice to meet you as well.
I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I have some friends who live in Split, Croatia, which looks like paradise from everything I can tell on maps.
Yeah, I haven't been to Split in a very long time, but I served part of my military service there, and I thought this is my favorite city in the whole world. I really enjoyed it.
Well, this is a fun casual way to start. I enjoy this. But let's I think people are here also to hear both our personal bone breaking experiences and but also they want to hear about what we have to say about the world. And it's a confusing place. It's become a confusing place for many, and I get it. And I almost feel personally a little bit of political exhaustion, just needing to keep my eyes on the frontiers of global developments on a day-to-day as par for the course. The hot and cold thing is again, it's a bit exhausting. There's it seems like we've seen this pattern again and again. Last night, just as I was getting my thoughts ready for what kind of questions I wanted to throw at both you guys, Trump announces, okay, psych, not going to do it. No, ceasefire again. All right. And wasn't totally surprised, but it did kind of throw off, and for the good. It's better to talk about the fact that we're not bombing Iran than, hey, we're bombing Iran. What do you guys think about the fact that that World War III is accelerated, So that's better. But that being said, the hot and cold thing is heavy. I'm curious. I'll throw it at Alex first to get your thoughts. It seems like as of now, the Straits of Hormuz is not opened up again. Iran apparently put out a message about an hour ago saying they do not intend to open up the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know, but what is your general take about the pattern, the beat frequency, the strategy so far, which has not plunged us into a completely insane place where we can't get out of the possibility of World War III. But what do you think about what's animating the Trump team? What's animating U.S. foreign policy right now? And then I'm going to throw the general question at Ryan, and then we'll maybe zero in on details after that.
Yes, thank you, Matt. I think that the Trump administration has well and truly painted themselves into a corner. I think that they are animated and motivated by wishful thinking, objectives that are no longer attainable to them. But at the same time, pulling back has become existential for their status of a hegemon in the region. This was quite predictable that this would happen well in advance of events. And this is why I was one of the people who, until just a few days before the start of the war in February, I was convinced that they wouldn't go to war against Iran because it was just so spectacularly dumb that nobody could possibly be that dumb. And I was wrong. There was, from the get-go, from before the get-go, there was a very, very high disproportion between the downside risk and the upside potential in that conflict, meaning there was very little for the Trump administration to gain by prevailing in that conflict. Maybe, they would get to regime change Iran. They would get to kind of own Iran through a proxy, through a puppet governor, a Shah or something, and get to take advantage of Iran in the similar way as they're taking advantage of Venezuela today. But on the downside, there was a very high likelihood that the Strait of Hormuz would be shut down, that there would be a very significant destabilization of the global economy, primarily the United States economy. And there was a very high likelihood that the United States would end up evicted from the region, which is what we're seeing happen now. And I think it's irreversible. And from Iran's point of view, I think that the Iranians perceive that they have now a historical opportunity to completely throw out Western colonial powers, because we have to not forget United States has a very visible role in the region, but the United Kingdom has also a very prominent role, even though it is much less visible. And so this has now come to a head. The Iranians have been at the receiving end of harassment by Western colonial powers for 120 years now, and they have an opportunity to throw them out and to completely overhaul the region's security architecture completely in their favor, because they would be the guarantor of stability in the region. And they have been designated as such by their partners, China and Russia, who are both fully supportive of Iran in all this. And, the United States is trying to keep their foothold in the region by whatever means necessary. And I think at this point, they are hoping for a concession from Iran. Iran has absolutely no reason to give them even the smallest concession. And I expect that they will not give them that concession. So, there are new proposals for how the Strait of Hormuz could be administered. The Trump administration formulated something saying that, okay, we can maybe Iran can control ships and traffic going into the Persian Gulf, but then Oman would control the traffic flowing out of the Persian Gulf, which sounds like a reasonable compromise. But then, it would again give the United States an in, because they would again pile on pressure on Oman to actually take control of all this. And so I expect that nothing will happen. And it's also very clear that the United States is not capable of overturning this situation by force. And just yesterday we had a statement or day before yesterday's statement from the commander of EUCOM, European Central Command, that the United States must choose. Do we want to defend the homeland, or do we want to defend Israel? Because we can't do both. And this is a very, very stark admission that the United States has reached the end of its ability to define the situation on the ground by force.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ryan, similar sort of question for you. What do you think is the general strategy? What do you think of what Alex just said? And yeah, I'll go from there.
Well, Alex, I appreciate what you just said. The subtlety, it was subtly said, and somebody might have missed it, to the role of the British, although it's not as obvious. I mean, my first thought is that what we're looking at is the complete undoing of everything from the Sykes-Picot agreements. The entire world that represented is in the process of vaporizing. And the British are definitely recognizing this. Article in the London Financial Times, really pretty intense, pretty shocking, I would say. They're making it very clear Iran is preparing for a much longer war. They have spent the last weeks seizing the initiative, intensifying attacks on U.S. facilities and facilities in Kuwait and Bahrain, with the idea of pushing the U.S. further and further back into Israel and into Jordan and out of the region, and that they intend to take the attacks, their attacks on the main choke points, the Bab el-Mandab, the Strait of Hormuz, and now possibly the Suez Canal. And of course, if you look at what President said, his comments were locked and loaded and ready to go. But it now doesn't ring true. It rings very hollow. And then I look at the Saudis, who are on their heels already. Again, they're trying to pull together some, to what you said, Alex, about keeping the U.S. a toehold in the region. Saudis are trying to create some new coalition to secure the Red Sea, and not even the U.S. signed on to that. Certainly others did not. I would just say that I agree very much with what Alex is saying, and the specificity with which he said it. It's incumbent upon the United States to have this introspection and retrospection and say, who are we actually dealing with? Who is Iran? I mean, this is not some island state. This is an ancient culture that it's very different in terms of the mentality. And actually, when I speak to people in Iran, there is a love for America. It is always misrepresented, this death to America. They're really saying, essentially, the United States should have stuck to its mission 250 years ago of anti-imperial traditions. And that's what we want to die in America, is the embrace of that British imperial outlook. And I would just take this one step further, that we now are seeing polls coming out in the United States, which Americans want to see people like Netanyahu arrested. They want to see genuine negotiation with Iran, and we don't really have statesmen, diplomats in positions that are capable of doing that. I feel like we might have to pull people out of retirement who are skilled negotiators. And we saw this also from the Russian side. Sergei Lavrov just not interested in having a discussion with the United States because our ability is we just lie.
Yeah.
So I do agree with what Alex is saying. However, what I would say is that the world is changing, and we have to make a decision in the broader West.
Yes.
Because you said, Alex, Russia and China are absolutely supporting Iran. I mean, we see now reports coming out about North Korea growing in their economic development, physical economic development, not financial, which is, we're addicted here. It's like we have a severe addiction to pure financial values. I'm reading now about the Turkey and Iraq are looking at building new rail links. You had this week the Chinese initiated the cross North Arctic route for shipping to Europe, and you have Pakistan and in Iran and one other. They're talking about restarting the 6,700-kilometer rail route to Europe that was cut short in 2012. So what you're talking about, Eurasian development, and I just want to say that the United States has not woken up yet to the positive significance of that. And Americans, MAGA people who voted for Donald Trump, they thought we were going to start doing this here and in concert with these other countries.
Yeah, that was what propelled Trump into a victorious position, both in his first and his second term, was this promise to end the U.S. involvement and enmeshment in these forever wars and focus on converting the U.S. military and productive capabilities towards rebuilding America's industries and doing the sorts of things, like you said, that China has proven so good at and what the U.S. used to be very good at, just really focusing on long-term infrastructure development, science, frontier, cutting-edge stuff with a spirit of peace and brotherhood with other cultures. And that was the hope. Of course, it didn't really go down that way.
I certainly hoped for it. I was excited for that, for sure.
Yeah, I was too. But it seems like there's a bit of confusion. Let's be polite and delicate with our words there. Alex, from your standpoint, since Ryan brought up the broader Eurasian, the Eurasian partnership idea, the BRI, this concept of China, Russia, Iran, which Zbigniew had said so famously in the 90s would be the only possible combination of powers that could threaten the New World Order. It seems like there was a lot of really healthy momentum towards the Belt and Road Initiative and the North-South Transportation Corridor. But what I'm seeing in the policies since Trump's second term began first with ISIS taking control or being given control of Syria, and then, various subversions of the North-South Transportation Corridor via some shenanigans of I think a big important strategic chunk of that in Armenia has been given over to a consortium of U.S. businesses that now hold lever over whether this can happen or not. And broader energy production and agricultural reliability, the fertilizers, everything else. I know East Asia is going through a bit of a crisis. Thailand's going into a crisis. Russia has announced that they're going to stop exporting or permitting the export of oil and a few other different types of diesel fuels. So there's certainly a shortage internationally on a physical level if we don't look at the purely financial side of things. But what is your take on Eurasia? Do you think that there is a general strategy in all of this to destabilize the momentum towards Eurasian partnership and integration, or do you think that there's I host a show on a mega platform, and many of the announcers are always telling me that no, there's secret agreements behind the scenes between Trump and Xi and Putin to do a rug pull and to bring a kumbaya. I'm not sold on that, clearly, as you hear the tone of my voice. But what's your take, Alex, on this?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a strategy to try to pull the rug from under the multipolar integrations from Belt and Road Initiative. We're hearing now Scott Bessent talking about the necessity of bringing everybody back to the dollar, into the dollar sphere, that everybody should go back to trading in US dollars, which makes it about as clear as it gets what the strategy is. And the surprise here is that the current administration itself was very explicit about that being a losing strategy. I mean, as recently as January 2026, January of this year, they were in Davos, and Trump's delegation was 300 strong in Davos, and they basically, their rhetoric was essentially a declaration of war on the globalists. They were saying the system is failing, globalization is finished, we should embrace a different model. And then not only did they make these suggestions, but the Trade Secretary Jameson Greer made a whole presentation to the attendees in which he mentioned explicitly people like Alexander Hamilton and Abraham Lincoln and Henry Carey and so forth. And so it was a very explicit, clear adoption of the American system, which would have been very, very random if it wasn't that explicit. American voters didn't ask for this. American voters are, for the most part, still stuck in the left-right dichotomy, socialism versus capitalism. The talk about the American system as opposed to the British system of free trade, this is not part of the mainstream narrative. People didn't vote for the American system, right? So the fact that the administration even brought it up in such a public forum in front of the who's who of the globalists, right? Practically the opposed side, indicates that at least some people in the administration have thought things through, that they understand the issues, that they understand the problems, and that they understand the solution to those problems. But nevertheless, practically within a month, they did 180 degrees and completely threw their lot with a globalist strategy of fighting wars for hegemony in the Middle East, right? That is very, very confusing, and that's very difficult to explain. And I think, like Ryan, I was also very hopeful about the Trump administration actually affecting a course correction in American foreign policy. And Trump himself, on many occasions, was saying things like that he wants the United States to become the global manufacturing superpower. He was calling people to join him in a battle against the global financier class.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not random statements, and they were not statements that this wasn't pandering to the voting public. These were indications that at least people who wrote his speeches knew what the issues were. And how that got overturned, I don't understand, but it absolutely did get overturned. Well, that affects the choices of the United States. That doesn't change the trajectory of global developments as far as Eurasia is concerned, because the whole British divide and rule playbook, their insecurity architecture that they seeded across the arc of crisis from the Baltics down to the Levant and then across to the Koreas. The game is understood now. The Iranians understand the game, the Russians understand the game, the Chinese understand the game, and they're pushing back, and they're not falling into their provocations. And I think that increasingly other powers are understanding what the game is as well, including those who are caught in it, like the Gulf kingdoms. They have now seen that the hegemon can no longer defend them, that they've been paying protection racket that doesn't work. They understand that their balances at the Federal Reserve Bank and the European Central Bank and Euroclear, that those can be taken away from them any day. That selling their exports in US dollars is a fool's errand. And so I think that to the extent that they're rational, they have to give themselves an alternative. And I think that beyond the public declarations, beyond what is seen in press conferences and in the headlines in the news, I think that the discussions behind the scenes fully take all that into account, that the world is changing, that fighting for the global order that existed from 1945 onwards is a lost battle, and that now what is necessary is to try to minimize the damage of the transition that's ahead of us, and to prepare for the new world. And now we've seen that, allegedly, if this is true, but probably it's true a little bit at least, that Trump was preparing to bomb Iran heavily over the weekend, Friday night, Saturday,
Yeah.
and today we're Sunday. There was no bombing, and now allegedly Trump reversed himself because the Saudis were exerting pressure on him to not attack Iran. I think that there's some truth in that, because the Saudis and the other Gulf kingdoms would take the brunt of the destruction that would result, and so they don't want this anymore, and so they're pushing back rather than falling in line, and that means that the hegemon's dominant position it has weakened very, very substantially. And so I think, unfortunately, the United States will not be able to get out of this by voting, by voting better next time, because again, they're going to get a candidate, maybe J.D. Vance, who's going to tell them all these wonderful stories about this and that and freedom of speech and multipolar integrations. And then once he's in office, he's going to fall back into continuation of policies that we've had for decades now. So it's not going to happen by democratic means, but in some way it has to happen, because the empire has passed the inflection point, meaning, it's now in terminal decline, and the different world is emerging. And so that's going to define long-term winners and long-term losers. And I think the American people want to be on the side of the long-term winners, but whoever they vote for is going to, again, deceive them and betray them until you get a monetary reform. And so I think that's the critical change that has to happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that you brought in the economic battle so concisely, and especially the whole question of the American system. And it's very rare that I'm sitting on a platform with two people who are both familiar with the existence of the American system of political economy, which unfortunately is too little understood. But Ryan, based on what Alex just said, and I also listened very, very attentively a couple of times to Greer's famous, I should say. It was a great speech at Davos last year, where he went through the history of Hamiltonian economics, all the way through Kerry, even Sun Yat-sen, its international expression. For me, I found one red alarm, which indicated maybe a crack, either an understanding or a deceit that was placed there, which was how he ended it. I don't know if you guys remember this, Ryan, but
I watched it about a dozen times.
Yeah.
So,
I wrote,
yes.
the third time I watched it, I was like, I sobered up a little bit, because at first I was like, the good guys won. It's here. The battle's on. It's real. And then I saw it a few more times, and I'm like, wait a minute. He's kind of he ends with Keynes as the apex of what the American system was, and the failures of Bretton Woods for not adopting Keynes's Boncour mechanism and the enforcement mechanism that would have prevented the mathematical equalization of supply and consumption in all nations, which was what Keynes had fought against Harry Dexter White. Keynes wanted that type of mathematical equilibrium with a global enforcement mechanism, a la League of Nations kind of thing, with the Bank of England, of course. Now, I don't think that, I don't think that Greer is a fan entirely of the Keynesian, worldview necessarily, but to promote, to end your speech with that kind of punchline took a lot of the wind out of the sails in my mind, and created a space for duplicity to be introduced. And, I just heard Scott Bessent also speaking very well of Bretton Woods, like yesterday. And he said, why can't we do it again? 2 weeks, you get the world nations together during a crisis, and you reset the system, and you create something that's more focused on reality. Okay, all right, fine, but are you thinking about it like the real American system of Kerry and of Lincoln and of McKinley, or is it some sort of a Delphic doppelganger that looks like but isn't the thing? So I don't know, Ryan. And you're based in America right now. What's your take? Is this the American system where we've been seeing coming back online with the protective tariff, or is it something else, or is it some other idea of it that's being introduced right now?
So, Alex, when you bring up American system, it's like my ears just ring because, as you said, Matt, nobody talks about the American system in any way. And I've been debating a number of my friends who are I want to say they're cheerleaders of Besant, Greer, because of this. And you brought up one topic that caused me to have some severe pause, Keynes. And yes, Roosevelt and Harry Dexter White, they were absolutely opposed to that that outlook that as you were just describing. The other thing is that in nothing that he said or Besant subsequently is about investment in the physical improvements of the infrastructure, which has always been kind of the cornerstone. So in some of my dialogues with various American advisors and economists here, I've been going back and reading David Lilienthal on Democracy on the March in the Tennessee Valley Authority, Henry Wallace, who wrote extensively about Alexander Hamilton in his book, 60 Million Jobs, which you can still get on eBay for $30, old book. But he specifically said that Hamilton saw realistically that the need for bolstering occupations and industries was, he said, an ounce of government stimulation or participation so that you could then maintain the vigor of the economy. So you needed that. And now I'm wearing a shirt that was given to me by a Chinese friend in Dallas. I just was in China, April, May, right before President Trump was there. I had no idea that I was going to be there, and I've never been there. I never thought I would go to China. And I have to say that all things considered, China is probably the closest to what I would call American system economy today. And when Alex talks about the death of the empire, I don't think of it, and I don't know that you are saying this either, but I'm just going to say it because of the debates that I have. It's not the American empire per se. It's this financial beast that people can't even really put their hands on. I talk about it as the new version of British imperialism because I want Americans to think in terms of 1776. I want Americans to think in terms of what Lincoln did, even though he never met with the Tsar of Russia, the recognition that the fight that he led to preserve the Union was an international battle. I think about Kennedy's America speech, which I brought up with you, Matt, on the RT discussion, from where he really discussed the question of how you get peace, not in our time, but for all time. So this question of the investment in the creative development of your citizenry such that they can contribute to the growth of the real economy does not really exist in what I see that Besant or Greer talking about. Also, you do have a ticking time bomb. What we saw in the last weeks with 44% negative decline in South Korean markets, Japan, it's being talked about there could be another intervention in the yen. I remember in the 1990s, I'm sure, Alex, you remember when the Asian tigers became paper tigers because George Soros destroyed currencies. And I'll never forget Mahathir bin Mohammed when he spoke and denounced Soros by name for attacking their currency. That was in the Wall Street Journal Europe, but not in the Wall Street Journal America edition. And I'm looking even and I don't want to go too far afield of what you're saying, but in terms of this American system question, Yang Jilin, who was the young guy here in the United States, Chinese, genius in Silicon Valley for AI. And he was wanted by Apple. He was wanted by Google, Meta, Stanford, MIT. He chose to go back to China. So, yeah, I do think that this empire wants to destroy this Eurasian development, and they also want Americans to be unclear as to what the American system is. So, what is American system? Well, that's communism. And I find that interesting that this has now become the new talk, the communist intervention in the elections, the Chinese communists and the Democrats stole the election. Right. So I think that we have a job to educate the president. We have a job to educate the American people.
Well, on that note, I'm glad you brought that up, and I follow China very closely as well, and it's quite incredible the record break. I mean, we're told that they're just able to do anything because they steal technology and they steal and they steal and they steal from the West, and sure, business espionage had its place and things, and everybody steals from everybody in a certain way, but China has outpaced. Has gone so far beyond anything we've done with their patents and their discoveries and their research on plasma fusion, high-speed rail, superconducting, like you, David.
Autonomous air taxis. I flew an autonomous air taxi in Guangzhou.
Did you
We don't have anything that comes.
You got a flying car? You got a flying car experience?
I got a flying car experience in China.
Is now. Okay. See, there you go.
And I'm telling you, they're innovating. They recognize our ability to innovate and to discover. But we then, and Alex, you're an expert in this. I've heard you talk about this. We then say, the quarterly profit, it's not going to come through doing this. So we drop it. And the Chinese say, let's make this work for the entire population. And we're going to assign, 100,000 engineers.
Yeah.
To do
so,
it.
Alex, what do you think about what Ryan's saying? Do you agree with his general assessment of China? And if so, what makes what mechanism makes China capable of doing these things that we seem to? I mean, I've heard the American system spoken aloud so much now, but I'm not seeing the type of like Ryan was saying, the type of infrastructure, the type of visionary projects that JFK, that FDR, that Lincoln had expressed to give it meaning and contour that I see in China. I don't see it. I don't see the projects. I see data centers. Yes, I see maybe a concept of retooling some automotive sectors for the military. Sure, I see some discussions around that, but I don't see the type of coherent, integrated vision that characterized the American system for 2 centuries and what seems to be revived in Eurasia. So maybe could you say a little bit more about what's the magic, the secret sauce that allows China to do that Western governments don't seem to have that as a capability? Or
It's not really a mystery, and we understand this in a fairly granular way. It's just it's being rejected in the West on ideological grounds. And before I get to that, I just wanted to go back to something that Ryan said, which I do agree with, and I've spoken about this many times in many podcasts, basically, and it's in some of my published reports. Basically, I agree that the Western Empire is not the United States, and the United States is not the Western Empire. And I always take pains to call it the Western Empire and not the American Empire. Our let's say conventional curriculum always conflates nations and empires. So we had, things like the Spanish Empire and the French Empire and the Belgian Empire and the Dutch Empire and the British Empire and so forth. And now people are talking about the American Empire. But in fact, in all these cases, the reality is that the nation becomes the host to imperial network, to a cabal that holds the beneficial ownership of the empire and uses the host for its financial, economic, political, and military powers in order to carry out the agenda of the imperial cabal. And in the case of the United States, basically what happened is that the imperial cabal of the British that was controlling the British Empire, when they depleted the host there, they simply transferred their seat of power to the United States, to Washington and New York, right? And they continue doing the same. This has nothing to do with the American people. This has nothing to do with the legitimate structures of the American government. This is a foreign body. This is a parasite that is using the United States as the diplomatic, economic, financial, military enforcement for the imperial cabal. And the imperial cabal is always a financier oligarchy, which is why I got excited when Trump was saying Trump was literally talking about the final battle against the globalist financier oligarchy.
Exactly.
So somehow that came in front of him, whether he thought it through or whether his speechwriters or advisors put it in front of him. But obviously it was there somewhere. Now, with regards to China, I will agree that China is perhaps the most spectacular success story of the American system. And the Chinese have implemented it with a lot of thought, with a lot of planning. And the way they have attained the success that they have attained has been through government guided 5-year plans. They are now in their 15th consecutive 5-year plan. And it should be easy to go through all their 5-year plans and to see what was decided and how it was implemented and the results it led to. But in the West, this is always labeled as socialism or communism. It's rejected out of hand in spite of spectacular contrast between, oh, let's have everything done by private enterprise versus let's have the government define the path forward. And then, because what happens in China is the government actually charts the direction forward, but then leaves it to every level of society to actually play their role in implementing it. And most of what is the business of attaining those 5-year plans is left to private enterprise. So there's loads of private enterprise involved. It's actually one of the purest forms of free market capitalism that we have in the world.
Exactly.
And it's, Chinese companies are subjected to cutthroat competition. And, in order for them to succeed, they have to really provide a good product, good service for a competitive price. And they have to compete against their own rivals. Whereas in the West, in the United States, Britain, Western Europe, there's a real preference and explicit preference for monopoly, for state monopolies to control everything. So, if we look at the AI, American companies had a massive head start, and they've literally invested something approaching $3 trillion because they decided at some point that achieving supremacy in AI was the next big thing, and that this was a way for the United States to go back to the unipolar global order, dominance in AI. Well, the Chinese have now pretty much closed the gap with their models. There are dozens of, it's in the United States, there's 3 or 4 companies that dominate, right? Yeah. And everybody else is being actively discouraged from going into AI because, as we know from Mark Andreessen, he wanted to launch an AI startup, and they told him, no, don't. We want this field to be dominated by 3 or 4 players, and that's what we have now. And by this point, they're being the Chinese have closed the performance gap. Not only have they close the performance gap, they are much, much more competitive to the point where 80% of all Silicon Valley startup are using Chinese AI models. So that competitive race has already been won by the Chinese. Then you have examples like high-speed rail networks. The Chinese have by now built 50,000 kilometers, about something over 31,000 miles of high-speed rail networks crisscrossing the whole country, carrying millions of passengers every day and actually working. Whereas in the United States, the initiative started in the mid-1990s. And by today, there's maybe 100 miles or so that's been built by private enterprise, right? And none of it is operational, zero. And it's been done at a cost that is orders of magnitude.
It's
massively. I think that, they built something in California, something like 1,600 feet, not miles,
right?
Feet. Yeah. And this was like a big announcement. We completed 1,600 feet of, and then it turned out that they spent something like 300 billion on this. And it doesn't serve any purpose, It's they built it, but it doesn't serve any purpose.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a systemic issue, because we are in the West encouraged to put our faith in private enterprise, in private investors. And they, private investors are chasing after highest returns on investment in short time periods. So, you have quarterly results, you have annual returns on investment. And so if something doesn't generate them 8, 9, 10, 12% return on investment, they're not interested. Whereas these 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail networks, they're not going to generate a very high return on investment in and of themselves. But what they do is they radically lower the cost of transport and the cost of transactions for the whole society. See, this is the lesson that is being obfuscated always, and it's been used in the United States. Like when the Erie Canal was built in the United States, it brought down the cost of transaction business between the Great Lakes and the East Coast of the United States by 90%. So whether Erie Canal itself was a profitable enterprise or not didn't matter. It lowered the cost of business for the society at large. It made everybody wealthier. It enabled entrepreneurship on a mass scale. It lifted the standards of living for everybody. And so this is what the Chinese are doing. And whether the rail network in itself is a profitable enterprise or not is entirely secondary. Maybe it's completely irrelevant. What it does is it makes the whole system wealthier, more agile, more vibrant, more competitive, more innovative. It's like having a road instead of having to go back and forth every day on a goat trail. That's the difference.
No, it's funny when you listen to or you read the transcripts of some of the debates that were happening in the 1840s, 1850s around the transcontinental railway. If people use the type of business logic that they teach in the Molson School of Business and things like that, if they applied that back in the 1850s, 1860s, the transcontinental in America would not have been built.
It would never be built.
No, yeah, the whole argument was, well, wait till there's a demand and then we'll build it when we can satisfy our guarantee our investors will get their money back and get the returns when there's a demand. And it's like, well, there won't be a demand. People don't even know what that is. So you got to build it and then enjoy the prosperity and the new potentials that you can then actualize as interconnectivity. You can now, what took you 40 days to cross the continent, all of a sudden takes you 2 days. Like, think about what will be possible, what businesses, what cities can be built. So I love what
there's technologies that you have as a person that you don't know that you need until it's been introduced to you.
Right. Exactly.
so
yeah. How do you know what you've never
like
had before? As far
the
as
washing machine
yeah.
in the Tennessee Valley Authority was not well known. They had to have government teaching facilities to teach people, hey, you don't have to go down to the river to wash your clothes. You have this appliance that you can now use. I mean, this idea of supply and demand fails in that regard. Alex, what you said about rail, I tell you what, I saw this. I had the opportunity to ride from Shanghai to Beijing, 800 miles. So think Chicago to Boston, I think. Amtrak, it's like 24 hours. We did it in 4.5 hours. And there's a little ledge by the window, and you just put your little coffee, your Starbucks coffee or your glass of wine there. That thing did not move, not once, the entire 4.5 hour trip. And people were, I mean, it's just incredible what you're saying. But, in China, they have a food culture that is different, I would say, than in a lot of Western countries. I don't know how many banquets I was invited to while I was there, just treated very well. The food quality in China is very high. Food is very inexpensive, and it's plentiful everywhere. And that is in large part because of that rail system, because you don't have to depend on trucks driven by people who might not know how to read the speed signs, for example. So to what you said on that rail question, that's very important. You also, I believe you mentioned monopoly. Now, I'm not a big fan of Thomas Jefferson, but apparently one thing that he did say in 1787 in a letter to James Madison was that he was upset that there was an omission to the restriction against monopolies in the proposed U.S. Constitution. I had no idea that he even thought of. So here we are now. Again, we're back to 250 years ago to today. These topics were absolutely on people's mind. And one thing, Alex, maybe you can say something about this too, that I've been thinking about with regards to China, also Russia. And I think increasingly with Iran is this concept of innovation under constraint. This financial blob, this parasite that you referenced, said, hey, here's a great tool. Let's sanction nations. Let's limit their ability to, our microchips. Speaking about AI, for example. Oh, we're going to get them now. But in fact, that has been the medicine that has only rapidly transformed those countries. And so when I'm sitting there in Shanghai at awe with these developments that you've described from these 5-year plans, which, by the way, I mean, in my own household, I have to plan things out too. I can't imagine just randomly, doing anything economically without planning. Planning is, in fact, natural, right? But when I have a government official telling me, well, we believe in government of the people, by the people, and for the people, I said, you're just quoting back to me what I'm supposed to be telling you about. So the sanction policy, if anything, let me just say, back up a little more. The whole Trump actions, the benefit of what he has done by his, I would say, capture by deep state actors. That's the best way I can put it. That is better than, say, under Biden or other administrations when we have taken the suicide pill for decades and decades, since Kennedy died especially. The benefit, the good out of the evil is that you can see very clearly now what is going on if you understand these terms. We innovated under constraint when the British had all of their various acts, and then we had to develop the nation. The 1876 centennial in Pennsylvania, You had all of these different technologies that came out at that event. You had Chinese officials here. You had Russian officials here. Who were taking note that the average American lived better than the kings and monarchs of Europe due to these technological developments. And I have seen firsthand in Tula in Russia awards to weapons factories from that event. So to me, these things are tangible. And so anyway, I might have gone off the rail there, but these developments continue as we listen to this financial oligarchy that penalizes other countries for developing themselves the way we developed ourselves against empire.
Yeah. Well, that was sort of like one of the clashes of the paradigm in the 19th century, was that you had the J.P. Morgan worldview that, electricity's fine, but only for the elites. So he tried to wire his own mansion, and, whoever could pay in the immediate surroundings to get personal, little to benefit from electricity and these things. And the same thing for Queen Victoria. She was charmed by this. She liked having little automatons and little machines to entertain the elites at their dinner parties. But the idea of applying that type of technology towards the productive process and the benefit of humankind, that was forbidden. That they couldn't even conceptualize how technology could be used for and should be used for and by the benefit of the people. So it was a completely different paradigm that was clashing. And I sort of see the same thing too, where you kind of have amongst the sort of tech bro elitist, dungeon masters, those who characterize themselves as kind of who are groomed on Dungeons and Dragons philosophy. They want to be the dungeon master, and a lot of them found themselves positioned in Silicon Valley, being risen to positions of absurd influence. They kind of like technology, but if you look at the philosophy of how they're thinking about the purpose of technology, it's something that benefits only those in their inner club, and to entertain and to help control the uppity plebes who have to somehow remain in the John Savage hellscape of some brave new world, while the benefits, the elites are partying in Elysium with their orgies and their whatever, I don't know, transhuman. They defeated death. There's this obsession with defeating. Whereas in China, there's a different philosophy that I see much more in harmony with the better spirit of what David Lilienthal and others had done in America back in the day, which is the idea that no, technology and the spirit of it only has validity if everybody participates and everybody benefits from the fruits of it. But then, if Trump in his first term, I support him quite a bit, especially in his first term, because and people liked the fact that he went to North Korea and he had chicken with Kim Jong-un, and they liked the fact that he went and met up with Xi Jinping. People say, oh, he couldn't say good things about China today because people wouldn't accept it. And it's like, no, they loved it. That was one of the most popular things he did, including with his devoted base, So why couldn't he just do something similar, or at least not be so belligerent? But instead, what I'm hearing recently is, there's landing pages on the official White House website informing people about how China unleashed the China virus to destabilize the Western world, and how China's upset. They intervened on the U.S. elections, and there's this weaponization. It's becoming increasingly impossible for Americans to even conceptualize what we're saying here on this show right now, let alone becoming collaborators with China on these big international projects, which is still possible. And maybe Trump is doing it behind the scenes. Maybe, I don't see it, but maybe, I don't know. But Alex, what do you think about some of these recent accusations of China? The big one I saw is China
stole the election in 2020.
Yeah, they stole the U.S. election for Biden in 2020. If you want to throw some of the other, or debunk any of the other claims that you've been encountering as well, fentanyl, I don't know, that's another one that I'm seeing. China's behind all of our fentanyl problems. Yeah, what do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, I think again it's the imperial cabal projecting their own crimes onto their targets, because they do want to take down China very much, and they are producing a lot of materials that frame China as the culprit for what they are actually doing. And I tried hard to understand how the global money laundering network is functioning, and I found a lot of helpful material from certain Western, clearly British sources that explain how the system works, but they pretend that it's the Chinese who are doing it. So
Yeah.
they explain to you what's going on, but they say like it's all the Chinese. Like in the same way that they told you about the slave trade, but it was always the Arabs. Yeah, maybe there were a few rotten apples among us as well, but it was the Arabs.
Mm.
Thankfully, I think that people are increasingly seeing through it. I think it's, uh, you know, you mentioned election interference. People understand that American elections are being rigged and stolen from under them, but they don't see the Chinese doing it. They do see the Zionist hand in it. The defeat of Thomas Massey in Kentucky, that wasn't the Chinese, right? Uh, the Israelis are meddling in the American elections, but you can't say that, and unless you want to be accused of being an anti-Semite. But you can say whatever you want about the Chinese, and you can blame them for anything you like, and you can blame the Russians for anything you like. And so, we've gone through all these cycles of hysteria where the Russians are being blamed for everything. And now all of a sudden, out of the blue, they're blaming the Chinese for it. The theft of the 2020 presidential elections was a well-known thing among the people. And
Yeah.
people talk about it, and people had their suspicions, but it was never framed as a Chinese thing. And now all of a sudden is the Chinese. And people are thinking like, wait a minute, what just happened to Thomas Massey? Why are all these Zionist shills threatening people who oppose Israel, who oppose American aid to Israel, who oppose America fighting wars for Israel and so forth? And all of a sudden it's the Chinese. Like that doesn't quite add up. Same thing with the fentanyl. Same thing with the money laundering. China has been accused of being the main perpetrator and beneficiary of this whole fentanyl crisis. But China sells pharmaceuticals, and China sells precursors to fentanyl. And you can. That's how Chinese commerce works. I mean, you can go to a Chinese company on Alibaba, I don't know, and you can buy those precursors yourself.
Yeah.
And you can synthesize fentanyl yourself, but basically.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that the Chinese are doing it. That means that China is selling these precursor chemicals, and they themselves are used for very legitimate reasons in the pharmaceutical. I mean, legitimate,
Well,
quote unquote.
malarial drugs. All malarial drugs around the world need fentanyl precursors, and that's huge.
Exactly.
And that's just one of several industries that utilize these so-called precursors, of which there's like over a dozen. So you could just combine whatever. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, and so this is all legitimate, and the narrative that then blames China for all the ills that are afflicting Western societies is obviously propaganda. And the United States and other Western countries spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year to produce xenophobic propaganda. So all those narratives probably come from exactly those think tanks, even the ones that explain money laundering to you, but then say like, oh, is the Chinese doing it? When we know from British internal investigations, from I think the House of Commons investigations or House of Lords investigations, various independent bodies in the United Kingdom that came to the conclusion that of all the organized crime in the world, the money laundering all converges on the City of London and its 14 offshore jurisdictions. That they are the ultimate recipients of the proceeds of organized crime. And when you look at the money laundering cases that have been investigated and filed, you see that it's all Western too big to fail banks, starting with HSBC, which, you know, there was a massive US Senate investigation in 2012. They were caught laundering some $800-900 million for the Sinaloa cartel. Practically every bank, Credit Suisse, UBS, Deutsche Bank, Lloyd's Bank, Wachovia, Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan, they all got caught money laundering for the drug cartels, for terror organizations, and so forth. And that's the reality. This whole business of like smearing China with all those crimes is less and less convincing as people learn more and more about the way our world works. And so I think that by this, you know, just a few years ago in the early 2020s, that was so long ago, most people don't remember it. But there was practically a xenophobic hysteria going on. And there was talk that 100%, we, meaning the United States, were going to be at war against China by 2025. I don't know if people remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But this was like, everybody in Congress was talking about this. And Marjorie Taylor Greene testified. He was saying like, I don't know what's wrong with these people, but everybody's talking like 100% we're going to be at war against China by 2025.
Yes.
Well, it didn't happen. It just all kind of like dissipated. It went poof. And so I think a lot of this propaganda push is also going to end up going nowhere, kind of like the hantavirus story, like Ebola story, like all of these scaremongering agendas that are being constantly pumped down people's throat. At some point, people say like, it's just lies. Nothing ever happens the way they say. I think that people are through believing anything that comes through the mainstream media, and not only mainstream media, even the alternative medias are now part of this. But these lies all have a certain architecture, so to speak, and so they become discernible even when you don't know that it's a lie.
Yeah,
it kind of fits the pattern. So you're like, this is a very suspect story. So Trump administration now suddenly blaming China for the 2020 elections. It didn't catch on. It just didn't get much traction at all. People are like, yeah, whatever, you're lying probably about this too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's very well said. We're at the top of the hour, beyond top of the hour. Ryan, I'm going to throw it at you. Do you have any final closing thoughts of what you think that people should hold in their minds going into the coming days ahead?
Yes. One thing is, thanks for bringing up HSBC. That popped up. I mean, you could say that's a Chinese bank, except they were involved in the opium wars against China going way back, and they were a British bank. So
I've had a number of people actually tell me that's proof that China's taken over. China's running the drug problems because they're like, look, Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank of Commerce. And
exactly.
I've had a number, like at least 5 or 6 occasions where that has actually happened to me.
Exactly. Earlier you referenced 2008. I really encourage people to go back and read the conclusions. I forget the name of the agency that basically investigated the housing bubble in 2008, but the rampant criminality at that time. And of course, we know there was tremendous amount of money printing going on to prop up the banking system here, predominantly in the United States and London, But on this, and by the way, that was when China started their investment in those 50,000 kilometers of rail. So we said we're going to bail out banks. China said we're going to build high-speed rail. So if people want an inflection point where we could have made a different decision, to me, that right there is one of the key inflection points. And I think that because I do believe in redemption, I still think the Trump administration could make that kind of decision. I think President Putin would absolutely work with a Donald Trump who made that decision. President Xi, who will be here later this year, I think it's in September. He'll be a guest at the White House. December will be the G20, so you will have President Xi here again. So there is ample opportunity, even in 2026, to reverse this World War III direction or financial implosion, whichever, whichever comes first.
Yeah, pick a disaster.
Right. But we also, I want to point out also institutions like the Jamestown Foundation. I have a special place, I think, that God has reserved in hell for the people that are part of that. They're the ones that talk about breaking apart China, as Alex was referring to. They have maps about breaking apart India, Russia. People said, well, who wouldn't apply their method to the United States? As you said, they feel we need to have what's under their soil, and those people are in the way. So in terms of what I think people need to think about, in December, the United States published their national security strategy for the United States. It does recognize the idea of a multipolar world, but I think it's a confused mess in that sense, because it's still trying to hold on, even in the Americas, to this imperial disease. Really, if we wanted to turn things around and we just wanted to apply it in our hemisphere and get out of everybody's business in the Middle East and get out of everybody's business in Asia, well, we would apply the Chinese model to all of the Americas and start financing rail projects from Seattle, Washington, or Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, down to the tip of Chile and around South America. That's what we would do now if we really wanted to abide by a higher idea of a new that Donroe doctrine. Everybody would be for. The electoral politics it's going to be a devastating bloodbath if we don't see something like that come November.
All right. Well, this was a very, very, I appreciate so much you guys just sharing your insights, your deep study of history that's informing your outlook towards the future, and the fact that you haven't gone black-pilled cynical, but you've maintained the humanity. And I really appreciate that a lot. A lot of the people I talk to tend to often get a little bit over intoxicated with the corruption of it all, and lose that human spirit that is so needed for creative problem solving and for that better proper system that we've been talking about. Which, I mean, people are often wondering, well, what is this American system exactly? What's the formula? And it's like, well, it's not really a formula. It's more of there are mechanisms, like there's protectionism, there's national controls of a banking system, but it's more of a spirit, an intention that animates.
Exactly.
Do you want to go beyond the limits to growth? You want to care for the people in the next generations or not? Or would you prefer to organize society around some medievalist feudal thing instead? Because that wouldn't be, you might have some of the outward mechanisms of this thing we've been calling the American system, but it would just be mechanism. It wouldn't be the thing. It wouldn't be the actual principle of what makes it work. So I appreciate that you guys were able to clarify this so much. Your links to your podcast, Ryan, the Substack that I think Ryan, do you put a Substack? No, yes, you do.
Yeah, I do. We're working with names ustourofduty.substack.com or whiners.substack.com. And Alex, I'm a big fan of your work. I listen intensely to things that you say, and you say many things that I'm like, oh, thank God somebody is saying this.
No, Alex, I appreciate that as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan. And thank you for the invite, Matt. It was a pleasure to join you two today. I just wanted to add that, I think that the subject that we touched upon today, the contrast between the American system and the British system of free trade is probably the single most important subject for people to understand, to get clarity about where we're at, what the problems that we're facing are, and how we can solve them. And I, not to plug my work, but I'm literally today or tomorrow, I plan to publish part 1 of my like a mini documentary report on the two systems, in which I first contrast the performance of the British system in Great Britain and what it did to the British society and British economy. And then I contrast it with 3 examples: the United States, Germany between the 1870s and 1913, and Italy in the post-World War II period, and the absolutely spectacular effect of implementing the American system. And then part 2 is going to be exactly Chinese experience with the American system. So that's going to turn up on my Substack and my YouTube channel.
Wow. Okay. When can people expect to watch those?
Part 1, I think, if not today, then tomorrow. And part 2 hasn't been recorded yet, so it's probably going to be a week or 2.
Fantastic. Okay, and all the links are going to be in the description box under this video as well, to your Substack, Trend Compass, and everything else that you guys do. So thank you guys so much, and looking forward to meeting up with all of the audience members again in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Pluralia Dialogos. Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.